When you brush your teeth, fill up your water bottle, or make your coffee or tea in the morning, what do you think about? For me, I'm often on autopilot. It's a privilege I've long taken for granted that when I turn the faucet on, fresh, safe water will simply flow. I don't often stop to think about where it comes from or how much I'm using. But after moving from Boston to Los Angeles, where water shortages are a continuous concern, I've become much more aware of how precious this resource truly is. Still, I carry the expectation that water will always be there when I need it. Water is the essential force for life's sustainability. It's a natural resource we all depend upon, yet so many of us rarely pause to recognize its value. Perhaps it's time we reframe our thinking. Instead of seeing access to clean water as a privilege, we should see it as a responsibility to ensure that everyone, everywhere, has access to safe, drinkable water. We are an incredibly sophisticated global society, capable of remarkable innovation. So why do so many communities still struggle for something as fundamental as fresh water? It's really challenging for me to even conceptualize that because it is such an expected thing in my own life. Welcome to Small and Gutsy, the podcast spotlighting nonprofits and social enterprises with budgets under $10 million. I'm Dr. Laura Scherck Wittcoff, and I'm excited to be your host. We bring you the less told stories of organizations that are bold, passionate, and making real impact. Perhaps you will find needed services, a job, volunteer, invest in, or donate. Small and Gutsy is more than a podcast. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we've recently been ranked number 8 on FeedSpot's top 30 social impact podcasts, and number 9 by Million Podcasts for our youth empowerment episodes. We're proud of these honors, but quite honestly, prouder still of our mission to elevate the visibility of small but mighty change makers. Do you happen to know a nonprofit or social enterprise doing incredible work? Send them our way to laura@smallandgutsy.org. My guest in this episode has not only asked that question, she's devoted her life to answering it, meaning the question about why isn't water both a responsibility but an expectation globally. As a child, she witnessed firsthand the challenges of accessing clean water. Young girls missing school to fetch it, women walking for hours each day to secure enough for their families. Those early experiences, together with years of learning and dedication, inspired her life's mission to create Surge for Water. At Surge, they deliver safe water, sanitation, hygiene, and menstrual health solutions through an investment in a women-led, community-owned model, creating lasting change and thriving communities, and it actually breaks the cycle of poverty. And I want to focus on that for a moment, and I know our guest will. It really is a differentiator than just an organization that delivers safe water. The women-led, community-owned model really is an investment in the community, and I am incredibly moved by that creation of that model. They are a movement led by women and owned by communities, and that's truly what sets this nonprofit apart. Their work is guided by 3 core values: equity, focusing on those historically excluded from access, especially women and marginalized groups; respect, honoring the dignity, wisdom, and leadership of local communities; and stewardship, managing every resource with care to ensure sustainable, lasting impact. I am so honored to introduce my guest today, Shilpa Alva, founder and executive director of Surge for Water. Welcome, Shilpa. I'm smiling because you're so warm and engaging. We met briefly a few weeks ago, and your passion is so clear. But I would love to hear a bit more of how your passion started. I did get to watch your TED Talk. I was really moved by it. As a child that never left you, and then I want to know what keeps inspiring you about this work. You're about ready to head out of the U.S. to continue it. So take it from here. Welcome. I'm so honored to have you.
Well, thank you for having me. And you just asked a couple of questions, so hopefully I can get to all of them. I started this work in response to, in the simplest form, what I would say is a calling, right? And that calling for me happened at a very young age. When I was 7 years old, I was in India visiting extended family because that was childcare for us. From the time I was like 8 months old, me and my sister would travel with my grandma to India, and we'd be taken care of by our aunts and uncles, my grandma, because my parents worked full time. And my earliest memories go to this age of about 7, where I remember being stuck in traffic, and we were privileged, right? Because we were in a car, an air-conditioned car, traveling. That wasn't a regular mode of transport, but that was the transport of the day. And just soaking in all the beautiful sights and colors and just vibrancy of Mumbai. It was Bombay back then. And just being fascinated by it, but also recognizing things that were different from me, right? Just in the innocent view of a child. And it's at that very young age that I saw children my age, right, without the clothes that I had, tattered clothes, and little girls carrying their little siblings in tow. Like, I don't think I'd ever carried a baby at 7 years old, right? And here, like, there's children doing their thing, like begging on streets and carrying children. So there was just a lot of these kinds of images, and, beautiful ones, concerning ones, and all of that. But like, what stuck with me is children my age in a completely different circumstance. And then I asked questions about that, but I wasn't really happy with those answers, right? I was like, how do you explain that? Like, how do you explain that to a child? And like, those are moments that stayed with me. But what do you do? I mean, the world wasn't what it is today with the internet, and how you could, maybe a 7-year-old today could do something very different. But back then it was just, okay, this is just a feeling, right? A feeling of injustice and recognizing privilege in a much simplistic view, right? I wasn't that sophisticated at that age. But fast forward, I grew up in Dubai. So that's where I was raised. That's where I went to high school, actually all levels of school. I was born there and grew up there. And then I moved to the United States for university. And I want to say that 7-year-old child like never went away. Like, that was like the initial spark, but it was just a spark at that point. It never turned into a flame yet. And then it was all the way in my junior year of college when I decided that I wanted to go volunteer. So a lot of college kids do that. A lot of adults, I mean, post-college people do this. You go on service projects, sometimes they call it mission trips, all of these kinds of things. And I did a 3-month stint or volunteer experience in a village in India called Rajgarh. And it was on that particular trip that my job was to teach like English and math and, work at a primary school and a secondary school. And especially at the primary school, my students would never come to school. Like, I think the school had like 150 students, and any given day, maybe 30 or 40 would show up. And I started to ask questions about it. And I found out very soon that it was always related to water. It was a farming community. So sometimes it was because the government would bring around these like tankers of water. So if it was your villages or sub-villages, time for that water, all the kids would have to stay home to help with whatever that entailed, right, on their farms. So that was one aspect of water limiting education. And then the other piece, which is what you hear about quite often if you're familiar with the water crisis, is just like being sick, like diarrhea, like throwing up, vomiting, right? Like, there wasn't that kind of medical support to like figure out exactly what it was, but you could see the symptoms, right? And children wouldn't come to school. If they sometimes came to school, they'd be in the corners and they'd be sick and they'd be throwing up. So I, at that point, realized that, yes, I cared about education, but education is not even possible if you don't have something as basic as water. So I'd say that's when I started to formulate that, like if you want to go after the root cause and try to make this difference, right? We talked about ending the cycle of poverty, which is a huge thing to be anyone's mission, but that's the end goal. And what do you start with? You have to start with fundamental things. And water is one of them. It's not the only one, but it's definitely one of them. So that's like the original story. And then, of course, how do you turn that into action, right? Like, what do you do with it? So, went back to college, graduated, joined the corporate world. I speak about this in the TEDx talk that you mentioned. And I was just climbing the corporate ladder, doing really well, getting awards, just going after that dream at a very young age. Got this opportunity to travel like in Europe and in South America, and just, I was loving it. And I was spending all the money I was making and partying and doing all the things you do in your mid-20s. And when you have the privilege to do it, I should say, because I want to keep recognizing that I'm speaking from a place of privilege. And that little girl, the 7-year-old girl and the 21-year-old girl came back and was like, hey, like, this isn't the life you want to live. Like, there's something there. You're not living in alignment with your purpose. And I'm fortunate enough that I created that space to hear that voice, because I think a lot of us have it and don't hear it. And I definitely didn't hear it soon enough, but I did eventually hear it. And that's what eventually was like, okay, I need to do something. When I founded Surge, the world was a bit different than today. The internet wasn't what it was. So I didn't just go like, I'm going to start an organization. I looked for opportunities. I looked to volunteer. I looked to join other orgs, which is what I recommend people do because it's a whole different world starting your own.
Absolutely.
And I just couldn't find something that spoke to me. And I tried. I was living in Minneapolis at the time. I volunteered and served on boards of local organizations. And my heart was just with international development. And eventually that led to like Surge and the focus starting with water. And of course, we've gone beyond that.
It's so interesting because so many people could just stay on a board or write a check. And there was something that just drove you into action where you weren't feeling like the impact was either enough or directed in the right place. And that inspired you to say, I have to combine this idea of community empowerment and potable fresh water for sanitation purposes and for sustainability, both in their farming, but also ingesting it clearly, because you're absolutely right. Kids couldn't come to school, not only because they had that commitment, but they were physically not well. And I'm sure the death toll was quite high in some of those villages around different diseases that they had from unclean water. So you are the type of person that inner voice inside of you said, this is not enough just to write a check to an organization or sit on a board, even though I'm sure they were all doing well. I'm guessing there was a disconnect, not only in sitting sort of in that space, but also in the concept of creating an organization that is essentially owned by the people it mostly impacts. And I'd love to hear more about that point of view, because it's really, it sets you apart, frankly.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things there. Like, I want to just also be very clear that there was a lot of like innocence and naivety in this because I didn't know what starting an org actually meant. I know what that is today. So I think that idealistic, like do-gooder of me, which, you know, there's a lot of complexity with the do-gooders and you can create more harm than good if you don't know what you do.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's how I started. Like, I didn't know what this even meant, right? I wasn't expecting this to be my life's work. I was doing it nights and weekends because I kept a corporate job for 6 years of starting this organization.
Wow.
Because it started as like a side project, right? So I didn't have that clarity and vision that may appear like when you look at Surge today, what it has turned into. But that's not how it started. It started with very little knowledge. I don't have any background in the international development world or water, right? Besides that stint. And of course, like the fortune of like tons of international travel just because of the way I grew up. So I think that was one piece of it. And then, yeah, absolutely. There was definitely I was at that self-actualization phase of life, right? Like I got to like my midlife crisis early, if you want to call it that. Like, I was looking for purpose and I was looking for meaning and I wasn't finding that in the opportunities. So writing the check and, you know, while I was doing well, like, well, how much of a check can you write at that age? So maybe that wasn't enough for me. But I think it was more than that. I think for me, it was really that drive of I needed to feel fulfilled in a way. So it was quite selfish, right? Like you want to be like, that was like, I was going after that self-fulfilling thing. That's how it started. It's turned into something else, right? But I was definitely looking at fulfilling a need, like my own need. And that happened to align. That ends up fulfilling so many other people. So that's quite beautiful that it worked out that way. But I think that that's, for me, very important to recognize. And then when we talk about today and like the model that we have, and you talk about our community-owned, community-led piece, I learned that because I didn't come in with an education on international development, right? Like I didn't go to school for it. I didn't learn all the theory. I didn't even know what a theory of change was, right? I didn't know this methodology. I didn't know these things. So I was like, how do I learn about it? And I was really fortunate that in the very early days when I still was sort of transitioning from corporate into running Surge full time, I used to spend a lot of time in Haiti. And I would stay with this amazing man, Patrice Talleyrand, who like ran our partner organization in Haiti at the time. And I would live in his home, with him and his family. And I would speak to him for hours and hours every day. And he would educate me on like all the things that were done wrong there by nonprofits and the international aid world. And he was very, very vocal and passionate, and he would take me to places and show me things.
You really had a mentor. He was really an incredible mentor. Yeah.
I remember once he took me to this like place where all these like houses were built post-earthquake and it was abandoned and they were beautiful new houses. Like, yeah, basically this international money was taken to build this new village, but where's the water? Where are the schools? Where's the whatever, like, all the things that
The
you need,
infrastructure
right? Like,
that was
the
not there to
infrastructure.
support it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really unbelievable.
So like millions and millions. And he's like, this could have just been solved if people did what I was doing. Stay with the locals. Like, you can't always stay in their homes because to be invited to do that, which is beautiful that I had that opportunity, but listen, learn, and hear from them. And so that's how we started, right? Like we started with, this is the voice that should have been talked to from the beginning. Like they have the answers, but were they not asked? Like who was asked? Like what was that process? And so it was taking that and then embodying that into the fundamentals or the foundation of how Surge runs. Like what does the community actually want and how do we respond to that need? And that's different in different places. And that's the only way it's going to work. And even with that, sometimes it's not going to work because there's mistakes made and there's all these other things. But at least your chances are higher, right?
Well, and you have a commitment from the community. And if they're invested in it, they don't want it to fail.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's a real partnership is what you've developed. And so tell me more about the program. I love that whole story because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. But in your case, you thought, okay, how am I going to find it? If I don't know this, and you started slowly, which I think was also really brilliant, both financially, you probably needed to, but also I think intellectually, you were like, I don't want to step on landmines, so I need to find out where they are and how to approach this. And so finding this mentor in Haiti was just amazing. And people, I think, by experiences, people are very generous when they see the goodness that you're really trying to do. I know you talked about your own sort of selfishness and fulfilling this, and it feels good. I got to reframe that a little bit because so many people would be sitting on a beach, like quite honestly, and stay in the corporate setting. So yes, it fills you. I don't think it's a selfishness. I think it's a yearning for this belief that creating a more level playing field or more equity brings the whole boat up. You know, if you fill that, I hate to use water as an imagery, but since we're talking about water, you know, you fill that up and the whole boat rises. And I think my guess is you always believed that. And then, I don't know, I'm going to add this piece because this is my own piece, having grown up to an extent privileged myself and working at a summer camp that was for inner city kids and so on and so forth, and done lots of volunteer work in my youth, is that there was this gnawing thing at me that compelled me to think about helping. I think that's why I went into social work and then eventually organization development and now doing this podcast and messaging for smaller nonprofits. So I think it pulls at you, whether it's from a little bit of guilt or the lack of equity or if you want to call it selfishness. I don't think I'm not going to let you do that. But I hear what you're saying.
That that's the fulfilling of something, a deep calling, right? And like that's
but but I sort of wish more people have
I agree.
that,
And I agree.
You know?
And maybe selfish is not a bad word when it serves the greater good. Right? Like, so when it aligns,
that's okay
right?
too.
Like, it's not, it's just one of those things of like, you know, we really have to be honest. Like, I believe this, like when you reflect and you go internally, like, what is that? And was I serving something that I needed to fulfill? And yes, and because of that, then I'm overflowing with this because I'm so fulfilled and I'm able to do all these things. So it worked out so beautifully, but it did start with responding to my own calling, right? And yes, what are the reasons for the calling? You're absolutely right? There's so many layers of that, and being compelled to help other people, of course, was one of the biggest ones because I couldn't stand to see that injustice. I'm an activist by nature. And like, what was that? Like, I needed to do something in addition to the, you know, the rallies and all of that. How else do you stand up for justice? And for me, this was one of the ways to do it.
Right, for sure. And again, I just love that you've created communities that are engaged and involved and are partners in this so that they have not only a say and a direction, but they take ownership of this in a very fundamental way. So share about the program and where you're located in multiple places.
Yeah.
So I don't know where it exactly started and the things that you do and sort of how it's grown from there.
So we are registered in the U.S., based in Chicago, and we have a branch in Dubai. So those are our marketing, fundraising, awareness areas. And then our work is done in Uganda, Haiti, and Indonesia right now. We have been in 12 countries.
Wow.
But we intentionally, about 5-6 years ago, reevaluated where we were working, what we were doing, and we decided to go deeper. And that goes back into what we do, right? So we call it Water Plus. So it's like comprehensive water solutions. So it starts with water, but it goes beyond. And it includes toilets, so sanitation. We do toilets primarily in schools and in healthcare facilities, with the ultimate goal where, really everyone should have a toilet, but because of funding, we're starting at community situations. And then we include hygiene in there because, there's 3 billion people in the world who don't have access to soap.
Right.
So providing
it's amazing,
soap, but
right?
with soap, we don't do any consumable products. So for us, for soap, it's more about educating communities how to produce their own, because soap is really expensive and it's actually cheaper to produce it. And then also it can be an enterprise. So several people who've learned, we've helped start several women-run enterprises in Haiti. And so that's the hygiene piece, where we also do education on just general critical hygiene practices, which includes things like, like how do germs spread? Like if you see water and it's clear, it doesn't mean it's clean. Like there could be germs in there. Like
Right.
those kinds of things, which is required globally, not just in the places we work in. And then to bring it all together, because of our women-centered approach, we notice that a lot of young girls are limited because of something so natural and so basic as their period, their menstruation. And this is because of sometimes of a lack of products. It's because of social taboos. It's because of no toilets. It's because of no soap and no water. So it just made sense for us to include that, because there's obviously the hygiene part of menstruation. But beyond that, our program goes further because it really looks at the changes that are happening to a young girl, and like speaking to them and like strengthening that, and like ensuring that they feel ownership of their bodies and agency of their bodies, and really to help build them up into the next level of leaders, right, in their communities.
It's great.
That's our comprehensive sort of package of what we do it. Where we do it is also really important. So we go where there's typically no other international NGOs.
Interesting.
We are working in remote rural places that are usually self-described as forgotten lands for multiple reasons, up in the mountains, a particular like cultural or tribal group that was ignored by the government, or like a minority group, like things like that. That's where we end up going, because we're not trying to overlap our efforts. There's a lot of water organizations out there, which is great, but they're not everywhere. And so we're going where they're not. And then even in those spaces, like once we're there, we start looking at stuff we've already talked about, right? Like, do we have the right community partners? Is the government ready for this? Are they going to work with us, right? Because we're now at the size, kind of aligns with the small and gutsy, right? Like, because we've gone deep into these communities, we can make a significant change in those places. So you need to be working in alignment with the governments, right? Like the Department of Health, the Departments of Education, right? The local heads of the local districts. So when you look at all 3 of our countries and the communities in there, our current service area is about 400,000 people, 450,000 people, when you add it all together. And that doesn't mean that, we've actually reached every one of those people. It's like, that's
Right.
the geography. Because it also goes back, like, we still count, right? Like when we drill a well, we count the number of people who are impacted from the well. And you build a toilet and we count those people. So those numbers matter. But I think just even last year, we were like, this doesn't make sense to just be counting like this. Like for us, it wasn't there wasn't a system about it. It wasn't getting us to the end goal, because of course you wanted to count people when you drill the well, and then then maybe they're double counted because now they're benefiting from the toilet, right? Like so we're like, okay, but what's the geography? Like what are we committing to at a larger level or a larger way? And we sort of switch the way we talk about it. So we count the impact of the direct projects, but then we really look at it like from a systems way. So we can go and talk to the governments, we can talk to donors, and we can have those conversations of like, this is our area. This is what we've done. This is what the government's done. Here's what's left. And we want to work to complete it all, right? We want everyone to have access.
Well, it speaks to your potential reach in those areas. And that's where I think you're kind of speaking to, is that the reach is much larger than the actual facility that you build,
Yes.
but it is encompassed with education
Yes.
and access and government involvement. So talk a little bit, if you will, about, because I imagine when you sort of realized that you had to create these partnerships with government as well as with the community, it takes a degree of trust building. Like, are you just going to come in and be colonialistic like some have, right? Or are you really going to partner with us and not shame us, frankly, especially government? So tell me a little bit about that process and how you did that. You deserve tons of kudos for that because that is not easy and takes time.
It definitely takes time, and it's the harder way to do it, right? It's much easier to just come in with your agenda, drill the wells, and leave.
Right, and just do it.
So the way our model works is that the first and most important player, stakeholder, is the community partner. At least historically, we've not gone in and talked to the government first. We found the local leader. And when you're talking about small and gutsy, again, these are these kinds of orgs, these small community-based orgs that are deeply and beautifully integrated in the community. It's usually because they have passionate leaders at the helm, right? Founder-led organizations actually in all these situations, whether it's an individual or a group of people, and they're still very active. They're from the community, and these are the people who are deeply respected by the community, including the government. And then we look at value alignment with them, right? And that's who we're trying to build the trust with.
Smart.
And even with that, even though my intuition is like, tells me like, oh, this is right, or that, and you can follow a bunch of that, we're also quite practical. Like you start with the pilot, you start with small amounts of money. You make sure like you see how that works. Has the money been used the way? So there is also data and like a technical aspect of it while we're building the relationship, getting to know each other as humans. Because in the end, like that's what this is about, right? The humanity of it. Like, who are we? What do we like? Like, what are our fears? Like these, the other things at a personal level. What are your dreams, right? Things like that. To me, that's always been our first way. Because the government also needs to like know we're serious, right? Like before they'd even talk to us.
Yeah.
So like we do that for a little bit. And then we definitely very soon, depends again on each situation. Indonesia is the most recent country we added on, which is now already 5 years. So we started a program initially like that. And then in year 2, we went in with our local partner. Our local partner obviously did it earlier, but then we went in with them to start like meeting with the government. And again, even then, I wouldn't say that we have a relationship with the government, but the relationship is still maintained through the local partner. So we know them and they know we're present.
That's great. So you don't bypass, right? That's so smart.
Yeah.
It's so smart. Again, it's an issue of respect.
Yes, exactly.
And trust,
exactly.
right? I love that. I love that, and it's brilliant. And you're really the foundational support that they're driving the bus, and you're there to help support that bus get from A to Z.
Yeah. Help with the fuel, help with like, you think about, right, like if they need advice on, hey, like what color should we paint? Things like that. It's just like, like the guidance. And, and it has to be at a point where it's not us forcing our thoughts on it. They want our opinions because it's true partnership, right? They want our advice.
Well, they know your agenda is completely honorable. And so to bypass them to the government would be harmful because it would then create a divide between them and the government. And you're going to pull out. I mean, the goal is for you eventually to leave and have them self-sustaining. So I totally respect your approach. And where are you in Uganda? Because I did a little bit of work in Uganda, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, so right now we're in the northeast area. There's 3 districts, Kabramaidho, Kalaki, and Amalata. It's on the banks of Lake Kyoga. So if you were in Uganda, it's like south of Gulu, north of Kampala, like things like.
Yeah. So I was in the Kampala, a little bit in the outskirts of Kampala in Namugongo, actually, was the village I was sort of connected to in surrounding area. Cool. So it's really interesting. And they are very clan focused, at least tribal. When I was there. They told me that it was clan, so I sort of use that word. That may not be the appropriate word. And so it was very interesting how they would be able to tell a person by their name or by the look of their features what clan, in their language, what clan it was. And so they weren't always so welcoming of other clans. It was really interesting to see that dynamic at play because from an outsider's point of view, you're Ugandan. That isn't necessarily true inside. So I love that you've really done your homework through both your experience and the mentor in Haiti who sort of walked you through. And to me, what it feels like is you're an incredible listener and you really do go in with this open heart. And people must feel that.
Yeah, I hope so, because that's the intent. And I also want to add, so like in addition to that mentor in Haiti, which was incredibly valuable, the other thing is I'm fascinated by history. Like I'm super interested in the history of almost anything or everything. So I would sit every night and like read whatever I could find about the history of Haiti. And I went all the way back to like the first colonizers and like all of that stuff and like read through it. And fortunately, there's a lot documented about Haiti. Now, it depends who wrote the history. There's a whole thing there. But so that's really important. I did the same for Indonesia, right? Then, of course, of that, you're reading and you're learning at a country level. And there's nothing that replaces, again, what you learn. Like as you talked about clans in Uganda, like what you learn at that level then. Because even within the 3 districts we work in, we're actually in 2 regions, right? We're in Kamamland, and then we're in Artisoland, and then you're in like Lango, and like there's all of these things, and you're like, okay, like how does that play out? How does it play on the dynamics? Then you got religion, which is,
and there's different languages, right? There's different like local languages, so it's fascinating. So I love that you did your deep homework for sure, and then you really. So I'd love to hear a couple aha moments that you've had over the history of these 3. And I know there were 12 in the beginning and now 3 that you're diving deeper in, which I think was such a smart move because I think the sustainability of that is so much greater when you really embed in the community with the support that you're providing. So any aha moments for you along that path?
Yeah, I think one of the aha moments was recognizing that we were just spread super thin, right? So you're like, we were doing some things which was still valuable, but you're doing water filters in one place and that's all we can afford to do. And then somewhere else you're drilling one well. And we were much smaller than we are today when we had 12 countries, right? So it's quite interesting. And then I think that combined with, when you see the comprehensive challenges related to water, when you see the water access is not on its own enough, like if people are still like defecating in the open because there's no clean toilets or no toilets, then that feces is going into the water, right? And if you don't have soap, right? So we weren't able to support comprehensively because our money was in so many different places, right? So it was both of those. And we were, and some partnerships had their natural end, so it worked out well, right? But for different reasons, because we have worked on strengthening partners where they've no longer needed us. And like, so sometimes some of that happened and it started to make sense. And then it became more deliberate. So it's an interesting thing because it's not for me at least, it wasn't like a single, like, oh, we should, like, it was a bit organic. And then you're like, okay, let's take action on it. And I'd say, even this week, this is really exciting. So like we're in the process right now that we're looking at expansion in Uganda. We're looking for other partners. And we're now at a size where the kinds of partners we talked to 10 years ago when we started work in Uganda were tiny like organizations because we were also tiny. And now we're at a much larger size. We're still very small, but for a community-based org, the kind of funding that we put in would be 20 times, 30 times what a community-based org's budget is. And so we're like thinking of other things like, would it be cool to perhaps take some of these small women-led organizations that may not be like our long-term partner that's drilling like hundreds of wells or something like that, but could we help them get to a higher scale for what their vision is? Like, could we have more partners in the mix and sort of have this feeder because of all things we've learned in community orgs? Because we don't want to leave them out, but they can't be our main partners anymore because of our size and scale. So is there something different we can do? And it goes back again to community ownership and meeting people where they're at. So we're just playing with that idea right now. So it's kind of exciting.
I love that idea. Very. And it also sounds, if I understand this correctly, that they could also serve to create their own leadership. And so therefore, it's like a pebble in water. If you create a mentorship opportunity for them, that's what I think you're saying. And I love that because then you're building this community concept that doesn't remain only in that community, but then could be built out from these other kind of smaller women-led organizations. And they'll have their own ideas of how to have an impact based on what their needs are, what they feel like their needs are within their community. And so that will naturally grow, both organically, but with direction. So I love that concept. I think it's really incredible. And it sounds like your approach is you yourself are open and it's iterative. So if something sort of doesn't work, like you did the aha moment of 12 and then reducing down and going deeper, but some of those 12 were able to sustain because they didn't need to anymore, which is really the goal in the long run anyway. And so now you're thinking about it in a slightly different way, which is offshooting some of the ones that have become a bit independent and can they create their own?
Yeah.
And so I love that. I mean, it's what we want anyway, because we want a level of independence for individuals to make those choices based on their own community needs.
Yeah, so just new aha moments that are coming in and like how do you incorporate it and what can you try? And
I love that you're not afraid of trying.
yeah, no, it keeps it exciting, to be honest.
Yeah, it keeps it exciting. I love that. And any aha moments, like when you started to build these relationships with locals, was there any initial resistance and how did you break through that? And then any resistance on the part of the government, even though the local was bringing the government to the table, it sounds like in most cases.
I think we've definitely had situations that haven't worked out and gone past the pilot phase. And I want to say that several of them have actually been because of us being women-led and like very patriarchal organizations, which has been quite interesting.
Yeah.
And we try to work in those environments and you just weren't respected. And it was quite interesting. And you're like, okay, we've also had situations where, and obviously these were not the right partners, where we've talked to you meet these community orgs, but their vision is, and again, this is a different time, right? This was like 10 years ago.
Right.
Because we're also at a different size now, but they like look at us and they're like, oh, you guys are tiny. Like, why would we want to partner? So we're not a big enough funder to them. And so, we don't match from a revenue standpoint, right? So like you have to, like, there were different things, right or wrong. Here are just different values, different points in your organization. So it's been more about that. But once those things have been, and obviously even those things helped shape who we are, right? It's really important that women are an important part of your organization. If they're not, we probably shouldn't take the conversation further.
That's a good point.
Religion is another piece of it. Like we are agnostic in the work we do. You can have a belief as an organization, but you can't evangelize through our work. So that was another piece of it that was important to us. So there were different things that we learned along the way. And then we started documenting them. And now we know this is sort of our like checklist of like at least initial screening. And then, of course, there's deeper screening beyond that.
That's so fascinating because you wouldn't have naturally thought that going in.
Yeah.
And so learning that is so key. And then I love that you're documenting it because you have a clear strategy for evaluating potential partners in the countries you go into or in the local areas you go into. And so I think that is so ideal. And I wonder over time, because I put my consulting hat, I can't help it, whether those documented components can serve as a strategy roadmap for other individuals wanting to do international work. And maybe they've already been documented, but not in the way that you're necessarily talking about, because if it had been there, you would have found that document and used it. So in a way, you're creating an approach and a model that could be replicated for others who are wanting to do this work.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that. It might be worth writing an article at some point.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely.
Creating a checklist. I do too. It brings you a little more notoriety too. I have one other quick question, which it may not be a fair one, but since you mentioned it, I do feel like it's important. In those places where women were not respected, women are still in the community. Was that heartbreaking for you to realize there was sort of a brick wall and that the women who live in that community will, for lack of a better word, continue to be oppressed in a certain way and not brought to the table? Or did it not get to that level?
I guess I should clarify. When I say women were not being respected, I mean us, like me, the women on our team, right? There's a particular partner where it definitely felt like it was us, like they were not respecting the three women who were there, and like because they were all men in the team. It never got to the point where we were in the community. But what I will say from a different sort of response to that question is, we are working in patriarchal societies and we are dealing right now in some of these communities with the gender inequity. And we're being very, very careful and thoughtful about not forcing our views of what gender equity needs to look like.
Good for you.
And it's very hard because we're seeing certain situations and like, whatever you want to call it, like machoism, like don't even know the words, but like we see some of that and it's like really a little bit cringe, right? To like see these situations, but that's my lens that's coming from a different world. And the women there don't necessarily feel what I'm feeling because that's the cultural context, right? I'm seeing something as disrespect, but that's not their view of it because that's how it is. And not talking about gender-based violence. That's a whole different conversation. I'm just talking about societal.
No, that's a different issue. I get
dynamic.
it.
So the way those are our team, we've been talking about this quite a bit because we're actually dealing with the situation right now. And I want to be really gentle with it because I don't want to force our views. And also it's not going to be sustainable. Like, what does that mean if you're like, oh, treat people like that doesn't make sense. But how do you really have these open dialogues, create the space, find out from the women, like, what lens are we viewing this from? And then we have to be comfortable with, like, that's just a different lens there. And like, you can't, I don't know. Right. So we're figuring that out. Oppression means different things.
Totally. And I love that you said it's really in a cultural context. And you have to be respectful of the women. If they're not feeling it, you don't want to impose that.
Create more problems. Whatever we could even create more problems.
Oh, it does. Because you're leaving and they're going to suffer as a result. So I guess the way I might think about it, and I so appreciate the clarification because it is so important. As a team, if you're not respected, you can't go in and partner. So that's a given. I get that. I think that's beautiful. And I love what you said about the cultural aspect of it because it's so important because our lens is so different. We're from a lens of privilege. And even in our own privilege, look what's gone on in our privileged world with, gender inequity and whatever, equal pay and blah, blah. We could have a whole separate discussion on that. And so I wonder if the approach is women have survived in those environments. And again, we're not talking about violence. We're talking about the cultural hierarchies, so to speak. And so I might ask, and I'm sure you have, what's the workaround for getting things accomplished? So in other words, you can't be too high as a woman. So what's the workaround that allows a woman to have a voice, so to speak, or have those needs met in the community where she knows hygiene and water and all of these things are important?
So the way we're handling the situation right now in this community is a couple of things. One, and we do this everywhere. We're hiring the women. Mm-hmm. So young girls are seeing women who look like them in leadership roles. And it was really key. Like, we went in our menstrual health training, like one of the parts is like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And like, it's so cool because, there'll be the classic, like, teacher, nurse, doctor, those kinds of things. And now people will literally say, like, YLRA, our local partner, YLRA program officer. Like, they'll name that as a career because they're seeing women
That's great.
In these roles.
I love
they
it.
see these people. So that's one piece of it. But then in these villages in Indonesia, at these government meetings or these official meetings and communities, it's only the men who come to the meetings and the women are cooking, right? And that's part of the role. And we really need to get the women's voices to understand the water issues, but they're not at the meetings when everybody's speaking about the issues. It's just the men talking about the women's issues. And one of the ways that we get the women's voices, we're like, okay, you meet our team, our young Indonesian women as well, who are mothers. Once the formal meeting is done, we go to the kitchen and we sit with the women and we talk with them while we're cooking or helping with preparation. And that's when you ask the question. So you just meet people in their cultural context that are safe. And then we were also told, like, it's an interesting thing because we'd ask these questions. And it's not even me, right? When I say us, I'm talking about locals, right? I'm just there every now and then. Like, if you ask a woman a question and a man's there, the man will respond. And I was like, well, what's happening here? And they were like, well, they're protecting the woman. That's what we do culturally. And I'm like, how do you work around this? They're like, well, if you say from the beginning, this question is for Dr. Laura, only she should answer, then everyone's like, okay. Now, like, so you get guided on like, what's safe for them.
What's the proper approach? What's the way to do it? When you come into a house, you take your shoes off. Like, what is the cultural norm of any of this, which I think is brilliant. And I also think as this progresses, there may be more openings and opportunities because things will shift and change a little bit, right?
Yes, and we have to have that patience, right? And not do it on our timeline. And what timeline do the people want that's safe for them? And I mean, think of how long it took, like here. When did women vote in this country? Like, this is all new, right? You still don't have a woman president, It's like a...
Right. It's really true, right? And sometimes I think we're taking a step backwards in certain social issues. Yeah. So I agree. And also, the biggest concern, and I think you've already voiced this, is safety. Safety for these women to be able to be in their community and not be so far outside their role that then they're not accepted as part of the community because that level of isolation will create death. I mean, you just can't survive. And so I love the way you're approaching this. I love the way that you will go into the kitchen while they're cooking and just sit and have a conversation. And then they're safe because they're talking to other women.
Exactly. Yeah. It's under the mango tree in Uganda. In the, and beautiful spaces that are joyful and like, where women gather and like you do that. And everyone feels safe because they're like, oh, they're just, the men are not intimidated because it's like happening in a cultural context that makes sense to them. But I will say it's also being okay with that discomfort, because there'll definitely be things where like it feels a certain way, and then these are parts of like growth for us. Like it's still a work in progress, I would say.
I hear that. And how do you manage that? How do you process that for yourself with your teammates?
We talk about it, we reflect on it. Like we don't always have the answers, but when we had these concerns, and then, you together, you're like, okay, how do you do this? And then we come up with ideas, we try things, but we just make sure that within, like, we're sharing these conversations and these values, and then making sure, especially as the team grows, like, what does that look like and how do you do it? How do you address it?
I love that. Again, I'm going to go back to the word iterating, because you're very organic in nature, but you're an outstanding listener, because you really are processing this and working with the community around their limitations, but also recognizing your own lens and acknowledging your own discomfort in things that just don't feel or sit right for you. And I think that's all good.
It's not always a great feeling, but yes.
No, for sure not.
Yeah, but it's the reality, right?
Right. It's a reality. And you're not talking about violence.
That we are not going to be tolerated. And that also happens in related, but there's no tolerance for that.
Right. There's a boundary, a clear boundary around that. And I think men sometimes are afraid of powerful women, or women who assert their power, and yet they're happy to eat the food, happy to have the relationship, happy.
Yeah,
so there's a lot of good that comes out of women-run industries. And as long as men feel that they're still in charge in that context, if that's part of the culture, then that sort of is. And I guess it begs one more question before we go into our quick and gutsies at the end of the podcast, is when you teach a woman, like, for example, how to make her own soap, and then she might want to develop a cottage industry and be able to sell it. And does that need to be sanctioned by her male counterpart? Or is that something that she can do for the village as a money-making, as a resource-generating piece for herself or a group that she creates? How does that work?
That's a great question, actually, that we haven't had to deal with in that way, because I feel like there's so much poverty in these communities that it has felt like any opportunity for any member of that family to make money is acceptable. I wonder if it's already being filtered at the stage of who's coming to the training. But it's a great question. And to be honest, I don't know if I know that. So I don't know how to answer that, but it's a great thing to consider, because I always want to think about, like, are there problems created? But I think, we have limited funds from how many people can come to the training. So it's probably already filter down.
Sort of self-selecting in that way.
Because it's already the enterprising women, right, who are like, I want to come and learn this skill. And then they're the ones who are going out and doing it. And those women are already badass and like.
Right. And they could be great mentors as you talk about expanding in certain areas. And then they would hire other young women.
Women run little businesses. Exactly.
I love it. And I might even ask them the question, are there other women-owned businesses in the region, and how do they operate? And do women only purchase from women, or will men come and purchase as well? I mean, asking it sort of in a roundabout way rather than a direct way to make it sound like, I hadn't thought about that, and maybe I should be worried. Don't instill worry where it doesn't have to be. But I really love what you're doing, because it's an all-encompassing program, and it's really based on the region and their needs. And there's some basics that are covered everywhere. And then you're really building out the next gen.
That's
also in terms of what I'm hearing in terms of mentorship. So I applaud you with the loudest applause that I can, because you really could have approached it in such a different way. And I love that it's not just water. And I really want to emphasize that. It is way more than that. And that is a fundamental resource. And I shifted it from privilege to responsibility, because I wish more people felt that it was a responsibility for us to globally. It just felt comfortable for me. So I'm glad you were okay with that.
I love that.
So are you ready for our quick and gutsy questions?
I'm not sure what that means, but we'll find out, I guess.
We do a round at the end of every podcast, and they're fun. And usually we get a few little pearls. And if you don't have any answers, say, I don't have any answer for that one. It's totally fine. So what is at the top of your wish list for Surge? And I don't know if you call it Surge or Surge for Water.
We call it both. We call both. Yeah.
Okay, good. Because I know it is surgeforwater.org, but then Surge. Okay. So what is at the top of your wish list for Surge? However, the answer can't be money or funding.
I would say that more organizations, more community-led, community-owned organizations gain independence and stand on their own, and more come through that pipeline, right? So where, yes, water and Water Plus is our mission and the work we do. But if more organizations can graduate from this program, I think that would be on the top of the list.
Well, that helps you grow and spread.
Exactly. And reach more people, right? Like much more, because each one is going to go out and do their own.
Yeah, I love that. If you were to think of a song that describes Surge for Water, what would it be?
I know songs that describe me, but I don't know about Surge for Water.
Well, it could be one and the same, as we sort of established early in the podcast.
The funny part is I've been asked this question before, and the first song that came to my head was Crazy by Gnarls. People were like, what? I was like, I don't know. That's what comes to my head when I think about my life.
I think that's what we're going to use, because when you think about the path that you were on, it can feel a little crazy in a good way, right? Yeah. It's like, that's a good thing.
I also think it's good for me and Surge's Girl on Fire.
Oh, I love that. Yes, that's great. Perfect choice. Yeah. Girl on Fire. I love that. Keys, such a perfect song. Yeah, but I also love Crazy too. I think it's both good. And they could be one and the same, frankly. Yeah, I love it. Which kind of leads me into the next question. What makes Surge gutsy? Because you're definitely gutsy, and you're now part of the Small and Gutsy family. I hope you don't remain small, but you're definitely gutsy. What makes you gutsy?
We dare to dream, and then we follow through on that. We don't take the easy way at the cost of like the values and the motto, right? And there's many opportunities to take shortcuts, and you're like, no, like we need to stick the path and like really stay true. And I think that's bold and that's hard. And we're willing to do that, even if though it is more stressful and can be more expensive and causes a lot more. But it's for me, the difference between right and wrong in the way we do the model of like decolonizing lens, right, to the work. And I'd also say the other gutsy part is to be aware of like when you are not doing things correctly, and how do you address that and fix it. And like, you know, like that's also okay, because we can make mistakes. It's not okay to continue to make them once you know, right? Like, so how do you evolve from that?
Yeah.
And that takes bravery as well, right? Because there's a lot of ego and money and decisions and like things involved, but like we have made mistakes, and like how do you address that? How do you fix? How do you improve?
Yeah, I think that's not only courageous, as you said, I think it's very gutsy. I think it's also really gutsy, as you talked about before, when things sort of feel cringy or your hair stands up on the back of your neck and you're like, okay, what lens am I looking at this through, and how do I really I can set my own boundary, but I can't set a boundary for somebody else if it's culturally inappropriate at this point in time. And so I love that. I think you're gutsy in a lot of ways. What is something that outsiders or even a few insiders don't know about Surge?
I think everyone knows we do water because our name is Surge for Water. And now I think we've said enough about our comprehensive solutions. But I think the approach is still something that people don't really get. The approach and where we do the work, because it's not, just like based on where we get our funding, for example, right? People be like, oh, you work in Africa. I'm like, no, we don't work in Africa. We don't work in Uganda. We work in these specific areas, because I think that's really important, because as you said, the cultural and the societal and all those differences. So I think the nuance, and I know this is with every org, and it's even with how we market, right? People can only consume so much information.
Right.
The strength of us is actually not what we do, it's how we do it. Like water happens to be the program, but you can take that model and then you can do anything with it. And I think that will be the legacy, right? Beyond the yes, we provided the access, which is really important, and not diminishing that, but it's the how.
Beautifully said. And I think the how is also teaching other people the how, because that is part of your model, which is amazing. And so you're really creating a legacy beyond the folks that you're impacting at this very moment today, which is really, it's beautiful. If you could get one celebrity or influencer to talk about Surge and spread the word, who might that be?
I really don't know. That's the one but if I'd happy to take suggestions. Just be a good person and align with our values, and you're in.
People can send you ideas, right? Or if any influencer hears this and says, oh, I'd love to be a spokesperson for you. In fact, why don't we say anyone who wants to talk about Surge, please do, okay? So if you have some potable water, drink it and talk about Surge on your Instagram or on whatever your social media platforms are. So what's the best way for people to find out about Surge for Water? Where do they go?
I'd say a website, but that's static because that's, the information there is, a good way to learn about us. But definitely the social media pages. It's just at Surge for Water and all your classic channels are on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and X. So definitely.
So it's Surge for Water?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
And your website is
searchforwater.org. Yeah, that's the best way. And I'm also always open to people, again, if you want to be an influencer for us, for example, you can reach out to me. Like, that's the other way. LinkedIn is the best way to do that for me.
Perfect. And when they find you on LinkedIn, through your name or through Surge?
Through my name.
Great. Okay, so you're going to get hopefully a lot of LinkedIn
connections
this way. Yeah, I love it because it really is what you're representing and what you're doing. And so the greater you spread the word, and that's what we're trying to do at Small and Gutsy. So I just want to take a moment and thank you for this incredible conversation. I learned a lot, and it was such a pleasure to connect with you. And I clearly love what you're doing, and I love the how, which is what you really talked about. So thank you for being part of the Small and Gutsy family. And I hope small becomes less and less and it becomes big and impactful.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. And I really appreciate it for you taking the time and creating this platform and giving us a chance to speak about the work we do.
It's really a passion, just like yours was a calling. This has become mine as of late, and I'm really grateful that I get to meet people like you who are, in fact, changing the world. And I admire you so much for that. So, so it's great.
Yay, thank you. Lovely to meet you.
Please go to smallandgutsy.org to check out all of our episodes. And if you're so inclined, please purchase some Small and Gutsy merchandise, consider sponsoring an episode, or making a donation. Both are tax deductible and help keep us going and spotlighting these great organizations. The opinions and viewpoints expressed by our guests are independent and don't reflect the position or views of Small and Gutsy. Of course, we can't take responsibility outside of our own vetting of the organizations we interview, so before you sign on to support or work for them, we encourage you to do your own due diligence and research them as well. I want to thank my partners in this endeavor, the Intrinsic Group, the donors, the sponsors, and my incredible board of directors, Brianna Carmichael, John Gatto, Lucy Mello, Ari McCoy, Melissa Greitz, and Serena Rajabian, who believed in me in this project enough so to sign on to support this effort, and all the folks, friends, and family who have guided and inspired me. And thank you for listening. Together, we are spreading social impact, and you can help us. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends. And don't forget to email me the name of any organization you feel would benefit from being interviewed. From small and gutsy to big with impact. I'm Dr. Laura Scherck Wittcoff, and thanks for listening.